Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And hope everybody had a good holiday.
Yeah.
Whatever day. Or if you didn't, most people, even if you don't celebrate it, you get some time off work, so that's cool.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. You sound like you're still recovering from it a little bit.
Today was one of those days at work where I was really busy, but it was all stuff. I basically have been talking for the last 8 hours straight.
Yeah.
So my voice is at that stage where it's about to just give up. I might not have any voice tomorrow, which would be fine because I don't have to talk to people.
I was going to say, today's episode might just literally be the equivalent of me reading off a Wikipedia entry. And then at the very end, you go, and then we end it.
Very good, Ben. Next week. See ya.
I'm dead. So yeah, again, I hope everybody had a good holiday. It was nice to take a week off. But if you don't, if you remember, the last episode, you brought a real fucking scumbag to the show. Just somebody, I thought that topic was so fucking good in that it was quintessential.
So yeah.
This podcast, it touched on so many things we talk about on here. And the guy was such a fucking murderous shithead. And I was like, well, I have to find somebody on that level. I have to find a real piece of shit myself. And, and maybe there's a little less humor in this one. I don't know why I say maybe. It's definitely not as funny as
Witchfinder General.
Yeah, he did. This guy, today's topic did not give himself such a great name. The papers gave him a pretty good one, but we'll get to that. So Marcel Petoit was born in Auxerre, France on January 17th, 1897.
I can already tell this guy's a bad, because he's the one that invented having a little stoop outside your house to sit around and drink coffee on, right?
Yeah.
Patio.
Well, it's a PTIOT, but when you're that's the thing. I'm trying to do the pronunciation right, but it's so hard to tell. Because all you can do is go online and be like, how is this pronounced? And then it'll be it's pronounced like this, except in cases like Marcel Petoit. It's God damn it.
I always go to those websites and you can type any name in and be like, how's this pronounced? But half the time it takes you to a site that's one of those computer voices. So it's that's not the human pronunciation of that. It gives you an idea, but.
Right. But yeah, I thought you were going to say he's a bad guy because his name is Marcel. It's
well, that too. Yeah.
So as a child, he was described as unusually intelligent, but also displayed clear behavioral issues in school, which led to him getting expelled many times, although he would graduate by the age of 18, so his issues never, really put him behind. One of his defining characteristics early on would be his uncontrollable urge to steal. When he was 17, he was arrested for mail theft, but was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. In 1915...
So... Wait. He was an unusually intelligent child who stole mail and was mentally unfit to stand trial.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. So he was a really smart kid, but everybody's something's fucked with him. And then, proven correct, it turns out, he was probably stealing shit for a while before then, but he got caught for the first time at 17 taking people's mail. In 1915, after he had graduated, he enlisted in the French army during World War I. But how long he actually, served and helped is kind of up for debate because he repeatedly took rest periods, which I didn't know you could do when you're in the military. You could just tell them I'm tired.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I like it's hey, march over there, be
I need to rest.
I mean, that kind of flies in the face of every military movie I've ever seen, but
that's okay. Really funny in the case of World War I. Just one guy is just like, but I need a nap.
That was what trench warfare was all about. It wasn't that they were pinned down. It was that everybody's like, nah, right. I don't want to go anywhere. I'm staying here.
So he kept taking these rest periods, but historians kind of assumed all he was doing during those times was he was just off stealing shit. Eventually, the military got sick of his bullshit and tried him for stealing army blankets, which maybe seems like a small crime, but like, man, fuck Marcel. Like, when you're in the middle of a war, it's like you need supplies and shit, and you need blankets.
Plus, that's one of those things. It's like it's one of those crimes that screws over the person you're stealing from way more than it benefits you. Right. Like, what is he getting out of stealing these army blankets? Even if you're reselling them,
yeah.
What's the market for
thing. It was a shitty thing to do, but Marcel was like a clear kleptomaniac.
Right.
He just didn't give a shit, and the court recognized this and found him not guilty due to insanity.
I didn't know that. Like, if you, like, yeah, I can't help but steal stuff. It's like, okay, well then it's all right.
Yeah. Well, this is the weird thing is people recognized like, okay, this guy belongs probably in some sort of institution. But you'll find this is a repeated element to Marcel's story is the period Europe was in the early 1900s was so chaotic that it always seemed to work towards his advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you look at it.
Which is a clear like parallel to the story we were talking about on the last episode, where the guy was shitty, but he also very much took advantage of the same type of deal, where it's just turmoil and war and
exactly. So like Marcel is nuts, and everybody is annoyed with him. But fuck it, we're in the middle of World War I. Is basically the mentality. So they threw him right back to the military front. And to the shock of everyone, I'm sure, Marcel had a complete fucking mental breakdown where he shot himself in the foot. Due to this, quote, abnormal behavior, he was finally discharged with disability benefits after a psychiatrist was like, yeah, this guy probably needs to be committed to an asylum. He shouldn't be serving. He shouldn't,
And as we all know, an asylum around World War I era was where you knew they were going to get the proper care and treatment that they deserved or that they need.
That, we'll never know because that didn't happen. He kind of just bounced from the military with no follow-up from them to make sure he actually went to an asylum. Right? They just kind of let him walk. And Marcel actually ended up leaving the military, and he ended up working as an intern at an asylum while he attended medical school, which he graduated from in 8 months, which is just fuck. Like, that's, goddamn, 2019 college sucks. If people have to do that shit for years, and this guy's just in and out with a medical
I like
degree.
to think he took that position because he is smart. Maybe there was follow-up from the military. They're like, hey, Marcel, did you go to the asylum? And he's like, yes, I did.
We need proof, and it's just photos of him with a thumbs up outside the asylum.
They didn't ask if I was a patient there. They just asked if I checked in, and I did.
So he then took his degree to go work in a town called Villeneuve-sur-Yonne in 1921. In just 5 years, he became a pretty popular figure in this town running his medical practice. So 1926, around this time, he started having an affair with the daughter of one of his patients. This woman was named Louise Delavue. Shortly after their relationship started, she disappeared, never to be heard from again.
Oh, that's a good sign.
Police investigated Marcel and a large trunk that neighbors said they saw him loading in his car at one point, but there was nothing concrete to link him to the disappearance.
What was in that trunk? Army blankets? Okay.
That would be fucking hilarious. It's all just shit he stole from the military. It is also worth noting that another patient who directly accused Marcel of the crime also died mysteriously around then. While that was going on...
no more specifics than just mysterious death? Like, they just...
Yeah, I mean, it was just... I think the only thing mysterious about it was timing. But it's one of those things... We'll let's go deeper down the rabbit hole here. Because it wasn't like, these people were getting, slashed up or something. It's in some ways so much worse. While that was going on, Marcel was running for mayor and won the election in large part due to hiring somebody who would come in and cause a big fucking commotion during the debate, which flustered his opponent and ended up making his opponent look bad. So everybody's like, hey, Marcel kept his shit together.
There's so many stories of that throughout political history about like, oh, well, the whole thing swung because of this one debate. And I feel like, at least here, this could get off and away on a tangent, but we still act like the debates are like that. Like, oh, if one person shows up with the flu during the debate, they're going to automatically lose. Right.
But I think, that's it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing, but it's like, that is something that, like, that's what, the media spends a large part covering. So naturally that is a large focus for people who aren't actually paying attention to the substance of it.
Well, and
so they get into that. Like,
consider that back then there wasn't like this instantaneous worldwide media access to people. So that's, a lot of times that might be the only time that people have seen or heard an account of like the people speaking.
Yeah. So it's like, elections today are very, like, a big problem with them is they're so, like, dipshit sports analyst mentality, like, covered. And, that was true back then, too. Like, so it was like, newspapers wouldn't spend a lot of time on, like, what was said during the debates. They would be like, well, he seemed to be angry when somebody, like, threw a jar of spit at him. And that makes you wonder how he's going to handle the job, And,
right.
Like, that's the type of shit they were reading back then. It's totally, maybe it wasn't what won Marcel the election, but it was a sign of kind of the corruption to come, because you just gave a kleptomaniac control of town funds, which he immediately began to embezzle.
Shocking.
That lasted for about 4 years until they convicted him of fraud. The punishment, suspension of mayoral duties for 4 months.
Vacation.
Yeah, they gave him a break. He would, again, like, he would get busted again in 1931. It was like, dude, you had to stop actually committing fraud. So then they had to remove him as mayor in 1931. But then he would immediately win an election as a local councilor, a position he would lose when he was convicted of stealing electric power from the town.
Stealing electric power?
Yeah. So
I like it. He'll go after anything. Like,
yeah, just anything, like wiring, fucking, just you leave your shit around, he'll take it.
You stole all the cardboard out of the recycling bins.
Right. It's your mayor digging through your trash. So, after losing the job as mayor and local councilor, his reputation was pretty much fucked from there. So he, his wife, and their young son moved to Paris and rebuilt up his medical practice, which was, for all his problems, it was running pretty well. But he would spend some time back in an institution when he kept, stealing shit. But again, the turmoil of Europe at this time ended up flipping him in his favor. And so France would fall to the Nazi regime in World War II. And, while the law was sick of Marcel just stealing shit, at that point, they only fined him 2,400 francs for prescribing illicit narcotics. it would have been a more serious charge had the two addicts who were set to testify against him not disappeared shortly before the trial. But at this point, it's like, yeah, he's stealing shit. Yeah, he's selling drugs, but just, you know, we don't have hard things on him. Just fine him. And we got to focus on the fact that our country's fucked right now.
Right.
So during this time in France, the country was divided by Nazi sympathizers and the French resistance, and also, the Jewish people who were simply trying to outrun and hide from the Gestapo. It was a terrible time if you're anybody with a soul, and a great time if you're a real motherfucker like Marcel was.
Yeah, I don't like where this is going already, but
he concocted a scheme so fucking evil to me. Like, it's beyond belief. In one of the most, like, evil times in world history. Like, the fact that this guy kind of, like, carved out his own when the big picture was so fucked. So it started with him professing himself to be a part of the resistance. This let him garner public trust. Fellow resistance members and supporters came to admire him and his efforts, which were really just anything. Like, he would do, a little medical shit here and there, but it was really to hide the dirty shit he was getting up to, which was a lot of, selling illegal drugs, which is not like, it's not helping anything, but it's not what was really fucked up. Where it got really monstrous was he invited Jews, as well as resistance fighters, petty thieves, or anyone who would be trying to hide out from the Nazi regime, to stay at his practice or at his house, and he would promise them safe passage out of France if they paid his fee. But he also hired handlers who would just, kind of round people up and be like, hey, this guy will get you out of France. And, they would all go to his place expecting, some sort of legit,
yeah.
They in their mind, this was a legitimate resistance man. Anyone who took up Marcel's offer, although it's worth noting he was calling himself Dr. Eugene at this time, would never be heard from again. He would tell these clients that they needed inoculations before they could leave, and then instead he would shoot them with an injection of cyanide and steal all their shit and dump their bodies in the Seine River.
Yeah, that's kind of where I thought you were going with that.
Yeah. Unintentionally.
And then you tell everybody, like, they obviously escaped because nobody's heard from them again.
Right. So unintentionally, this is probably the only time in history where you find yourself hoping the Gestapo finds somebody, because the resistance saw Marcel as an ally, not knowing what he was up to, but the Gestapo just know there's like some doctor supposedly trying to help people escape. As the Gestapo's presence grew on the streets of France, Marcel had to change his approach from dumping the bodies in the river to putting the bodies in vats of quicklime, disintegrating them. Once the Gestapo caught wind of Dr. Eugene, they arrested his accomplices and tortured them into giving up his real name, Marcel Petoit. And let's take a moment to appreciate the fucking tragic scenario of this planet where a man is killing Jewish people for profit, and it's a bunch of Nazis being like, you can't do that, with zero self-awareness.
The tragic scenario of these people that got tortured thinking that they were protecting a guy that's really a giant piece of shit. Because I'm sure his accomplices, well, I don't know, maybe we'll get to that, but the way I'm taking it is that they didn't know what he was doing either.
The Gestapo figured out when they caught his accomplices, from my understanding. The Nazis knew what they were doing, so I'm just pointing out the fucking tragic irony of Nazis not being self-aware enough to realize to know what he's doing is wrong, but not enough to be what we're doing is fucked. But you're absolutely right. It's all it's all a horrible situation where the resistance think this guy's on their side, and you don't expect to hear back from these people who are on the run, so there's no follow-up. So kind of any serial killer, he's targeting people who are vulnerable and nobody will be able to track them down. It's, why serial killers in modern days go after like prostitutes and stuff. You go after the people who have probably the weakest social circle. But anyway, so the Gestapo got wind of Marcel and they were on the hunt for him. So Marcel fled to another part of Paris before they could find him. Only this time he was without his lackeys. But that wouldn't stop him. He's a fucking maniac. Not just a thief at this point, just a legitimate crazy piece of shit. And he kept running his sick fucking murder operation. But being on his own, disposal was becoming overwhelming for him. One day in 1944, he left town, and while he was away, his neighbors began to notice a terrible odor from his house and a particularly noxious smoke coming out of his chimney. The police arrived at the house thinking something was on fire, but they found a note on the door from Marcel stating he had left town and would return in a few days, and since there wasn't anything like smoking out of the door or whatever, it was just a terrible odor, the police decided to just contact him about the bizarre condition of his home, to which Marcel told them to absolutely not enter the house until he got back.
Police work.
So they waited an hour, which is a lot longer than I would have waited if somebody told me not to do that. But eventually they just said screw it and entered with firemen. There they found bodies and body parts just everywhere. Marcel had engaged in this murder spree primarily for money, but there's no doubt that he had a very sick, kind of barbaric attitude towards life. Limbs were packed in suitcases and bags. His garage had vats of quicklime and an incinerator filled with bones. They suspect they found 10 full bodies that day, but none of them were intact, so they can't be sure.
Yeah.
I want to give these cops a pass for what happened next, given the state of France at the time, but I really can't. This is just fucking stupid. So Marcel arrived shortly after and attempted to explain, "It's okay, these were all Germans and traitors that I killed." And while not being entirely okay with it, the cops accepted that as enough of an explanation to put off arresting him just yet. Not everyone was that stupid, though, and Commissaire Georges Victor Massou took charge of the official investigation after this. He deemed Marcel immediately as a dangerous lunatic and was probably flabbergasted that the cops let him walk with that type of explanation. He immediately rounded up Marcel's wife and brother and the men who had helped Petoit in the beginning and began piecing the picture together. Once he knew what had happened, he arrested all of them as accomplices, and fucking surprise, when they went to get Marcel, he was gone.
He didn't wait around for him?
God damn it. How do you, if you're the cops here, how are you okay, well, you just stay put, and tomorrow we might come back, And
if you see us arresting everybody you know, don't go anywhere.
Right. All right, so 1944, when Normandy was invaded, the search for Marcel again got, put on hold. Again, war kind of bailed him out. Because the war took priority, Petoit was able to hide with friends, claiming the Gestapo pursued him for the murders of informants. He would take a number of different names, grow his hair and his beard out, and avoided capture for at least a month. It's hard to tell over Marcel's life how often he wanted the spotlight and how often he didn't. But whether he wanted it or not, he was just never able to keep a low profile. And as he was hiding, he would end up rejoining with the resistance fighters. And I guess he was so good that they were all fucking hip hip hooray for Marcel. when he turned out to be a hell of a resistance man. I guess after years of training, he got really good at killing or something. Who would have thought? And under this, new found popularity, a French periodical ran a profile on him. And when the paper hit the stands, several people recognized this hero that the papers not too long ago were calling Dr. Satan. And they alerted the police that this man was still in Paris.
I love the image because in a lot of ways our media today is the same way. Dr. Satan, hail hero. It's like, right. You guys, the same person wrote both these articles. What?
But what a hero. So Marcel was finally recognized by somebody at a train station in February of 1944 and was arrested and charged with murder. The trial would start 2 years later in March, where he would face 135 criminal charges. He maintained that he only killed enemies of France as a resistance fighter at first, but then he kept rambling and listing resistance groups by name that everyone in the court told Marcel didn't actually exist. So he was like destroying his own alibi before the prosecution could. And he couldn't explain when the investigation proved he was stealing from everyone he was killing. They estimate he made off with more than 200,000 francs over the course of his murders, translating to around $2 million US. Although, like, the articles I read about this, the math and the translation, and the conversion from one currency to the other doesn't quite add up. So it could be 2 million, it could be 4 million. Either way, he got a lot of fucking money over this time.
I just like the idea. Like, you said that there were Germans, like enemies that you were killing, but why are you now wearing that person's shirt that says I love or I heart Judaism? Like,
wait, what?
Isn't that Bill's hat? Like,
what are you talking about? If he's saying he's killing Germans, why would he?
No, because he's taking all the innocent people's stuff.
Oh.
Like that's how I thought he was going to get caught when they say like, "Oh, you're going to help smuggle Jim across enemy lines," and then it's like he shows up the next day wearing Jim's hat. Like,
it's an I heart Jew. No, he's like, I love Jews so much, that's why I kill the Germans. And then he turns around and the shirt's just covered in blood. As the trial went on, Marcel admitted to killing some, but not all of the 27 victims they ultimately ended up finding in his residences. That usual serial killer shit where it's like, well, I'll admit to this crime, but I won't just fess up to everything I did. Eventually, by the end of his trial, he got convicted of 26 of the murders, and he ended up claiming he killed 60 people over the course of his life. Sentenced to death by beheading, Marcel Petoit made his walk to the guillotine on May 25th, 1946. The end.
Yeah.
It is.
I was waiting for he made his walk to the guillotine, and then it was on the day that like France got bombed and he escaped, and
then he teamed up with the France resistance again. Because that's what he kept doing. He I'll give him credit. He totally hid in plain sight. But
I want to like get a transcript of the court thing where he's making up French resistance groups. So
yeah, but no, I was with the Purple Wombats that night, and but it was crazy to me. Like, the sheer like numbers obviously aren't equivalent at all, but the fact that this guy like preyed on Jewish people just as hard as like the Nazi regime, as much as one man could.
Well, and there's different factors. I don't know. Part of me almost feels like it's like, yeah, the other guy, I think I forget the number now from last week. The last episode was like 300 or something. And it's like this one's 60, but I feel like after a point, and it's a relatively low point, Like 300's bad. 60 is not that, like, it's not like, well, that's, only a fraction of
substantial serial killer number.
Right.
But it's not like the equivalent of like a coordinated, attempt to extinct an entire race or something.
But he gets bonus evil points for, like, the witch hunt thing's bad because you're just innocent people. His thing wasn't just innocent people, but it was people already, like, in the most vulnerable, horrible position that they could be in, and then him specifically using that in order to victimize them.
Right. And, you have to be, like, such a fucking sick son of a bitch to even think to do that in that state. And
I know you're more on it because you used to, or still do, like, you read a lot of the serial killer stuff in the shows and whatnot, and we've talked about over the years that we've been doing shows that there's different kinds of serial killers, but the one that's, I think, scariest to most of us is the one that just literally absolutely has no regard to human life. Like, that's why they kill, because they don't feel like it's wrong in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, any serial killer does not have regard for human life. It's just a matter of, like, how do they see human life as something they can take advantage of?
That's true. And
there's something,
I guess, specifically too, there's the ones that know what they're doing is wrong. And then there's the ones that, like, they don't know, at least on the moral side, they don't feel it's wrong. They know it's, like, from a law standpoint, that they don't want to get caught. It's not like they're going to walk up and murder somebody in broad daylight and say, oh, I didn't know you couldn't do that. But they just they don't understand why it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you get, like, there are people who are like, I just know I have this, evil in me and I can't control it, but I know it's wrong. And those people always confuse me because it's like, then turn yourself in. What the fuck? But then there's also the people who, like, they're the other types of, just lunatic monsters out there who think that what they're doing is some fucking, higher purpose beyond, like, human law. But killers like Marcel, and we also did the acid bath murderer way early on in the show. These guys they're always fascinating to me because these are people who don't do the actual killing for, like, there is some sort of sick pleasure to it, because there has to be to do it this much. But, they're not, for a lot of killers, the murder is the reward. And in this case, like, when they're doing this shit for profit and they just get so comfortable with it, like, there's almost something just so disturbing in another way where it's like when serial killing becomes a business,
That's true. Yeah.
And, like, when you turn it, like, H.H. Holmes was another one where it's like,
and we've covered a few, the relatively small percentage of serial killers that are women tend to be the ones that do it. And we covered a guy that did it too, but, where they marry and kill off the spouse for the inheritance. And they do that over and over. And same deal. I mean, they've turned it into, this is a profit-making scheme. Although those tend to be on you don't tend to be able to get away with murdering 60 spouses before somebody catches on. But
if our show's any indication, nobody catches on quite quick enough.
Yeah, I was just thinking, my next time I Google something for the show might be like, what's the record number of spouses murdered?
What is the record number for incompetent detective bungles on a single murder case? But yeah, that's the story of Marcel Petoit. He's a real son of a bitch. But it's also like, it's as fucked as it was, and a little surprised I hadn't heard the stories before. It's also not surprising to know that there were monsters like him kind of lurking. I mean, there are monsters lurking.
I'm sure there was people left and right
like,
taking advantage of that situation. Yeah.
Yeah. But that there's like these people who are just like, man, the war we could really turn this to our advantage in the sickest fucking way possible. Yeah, it was that was a rough one to read, but it was fascinating. And now I'm done, and now it's over. So that's the show. Come back next week. We'll have another show.
It's bound to be lighter hearted because I don't know if we can continue like the path that the trajectory that we're on.
Yeah, I don't know. We could hammer this all the way to like the fucking depths of the human spirit.
Until till we get to that point where it's just like one guy responsible for millions of deaths.
Well, one day it'll just be us explaining what will happen when the sun finally erupts and then goes out. And
Which it's just, maybe that'll be next week because I'll go into just a really slow, measured, but scientific, in-depth, step-by-step process of what it's like to suffocate to death.
Like, man, that's
what we gotta save.
This show isn't healthy.
Save that for our Christmas special.
Whatever I get for Christmas, I don't want it in a plastic bag, please. All right, see you next week.
Later.